The sun had not yet risen. The dim light of the early morning covered the small village in the old kitchen of a tiled roof house of Mr. Two. A 70-year-old man was busily preparing. His skinny, experienced hands gently arranged the fresh vegetables just picked from the garden into a large basket. The green bunches of water spinach, some shiny purple fruits, and a few small pumpkins were neatly arranged, waiting for him to go to the market to sell. Mr. Two's life was not luxurious at this age. He should have been resting, but he still wanted to work a little to make a living. He also had some money to help his children. He often told himself that every time someone advised him to rest, he lived alone in a small house. His wife had passed away a long time ago, and his children all worked far away. Every morning, he woke up very early, rode his old bike, carried a basket of vegetables to the market, and joined the bustling life of his traders. The market was not only a place to make a living, but also a place to chat and socialize with old friends. That morning, like every other day, Mr. Two carefully checked, put the basket of vegetables on the bicycle he had been attached to for many years, and then pedaled out onto the road. The cold morning wind caressed his wrinkled face, but he still felt warm inside as he passed the main road near the market. Mr. Two gently tightened the steering wheel carefully, steering the bike past the cars parked close together. Suddenly, when he was about to turn into a small alley, his bike wobbled and a loud crash made him startled. The bike lost balance. His basket of vegetables fell down. A few bunches of vegetables and lychees and eggs rolled on the road. He turned around to see a shiny black car parked on the side, a long scratch clearly visible on the body of the car. Mr. Two stood still for a moment. His heart was pounding, not because of pain, but because of fear. The car looked very expensive. He knew I just caused a big problem. Oh my God, why did you hit them such a luxurious car? He muttered, his hand trembling, as he picked up the bunches of vegetables scattered on the ground. While he was still confused, the car door opened. A well-dressed young man stepped out, his face full of anger. He looked at the scratch on the car, then turned to Mr. Two, old man. "What the hell are you doing?" His voice rang out harshly, attracting the attention of passers-by. Mr. Two bowed his head and said softly, "Boy, I didn't mean I'm sorry. I will pay you back." "You think? Can you pay for it? Do you know how much this car costs?" He interrupted him. His voice grew louder and louder. Passers-by started to stop and look at the argument. Mr. Two felt his face burning with both embarrassment and worry. He quickly said, "I'm sorry, it's just my bike slipped off the handlebars. Just tell me how much it will cost to fix the bike. I will try to collect the money to pay." But his apology, it seemed to only make the man more upset. He walked over, pointing at Mr. Two's face. Collecting money. He knew how long it would take to collect it, when it was his fault he had to pay for it. Then why not stay home and rest on the street, bothering others? Those words seemed to cut into Mr. Two's heart. He could only bow his head, his hands trembling, picking up the bunches of vegetables and the broken egg in the midst of the tense situation. A female voice said from behind, "What's so noisy? What's going on? Say it clearly. Why are you so loud with an elderly person?" All eyes turned back. A noble woman dressed politely stepped down from the back of the car. Mrs. An's eyes showed strictness mixed with calmness. The noble woman walked forward, a designer handbag on her hand, high heels, tapping rhythmically on her face. Her gaze swept over the scene. A luxury car was scratched. A skinny old man was bending down to pick up some bunches of vegetables that had fallen, and a curious crowd standing around. She frowned slightly. Her voice was deep but powerful. "What's going on here?" The young driver who had just scolded Mr. Two turned to the woman. His face immediately changed. His rude look disappeared, replaced by clear respect. He bowed politely, said, "Ma'am, this old man scratched your car on his bike. We were just handling it. How can you handle it? That you're so loud, ma'am." Looking at him, his eyes couldn't hide his dissatisfaction. The driver was embarrassed, not daring to say more. Seeing that, she turned to Mr. 2, softer voice. "Old man, are you okay? Are you hurt anywhere?" Mr. 2 looked up. His eyes were red from pressure and shame. He shook his head. His voice was trembling. "Thank you, I'm fine. I just accidentally scratched the car. I'm really sorry." She looked at Mr. 2 for a moment, then nodded slightly. Her eyes softened, but still kept a serious expression when she turned to the driver. The car was scratched, but not to a serious extent. "Why did you scold me like that? You don't know how to behave. You're old. It's normal to accidentally do something. We need to solve this, but not by bullying the elderly." The driver bowed his head. "Li Nida. I'm sorry, sister. I'm a bit hot-tempered." The woman sighed and shook her head, as if nothing. Hai Long then turned to the crowd, watching. "Everyone, please don't stand here anymore. I will solve this." The people standing around started to disperse, but no one left completely. They just stepped back a little. Her eyes were still focused on the conversation. She looked at Mr. 2 and gave a slight smile. "Old man, calm down. I'm not the type of person to make things difficult for you, just because of something small scratch. But can you tell me the whole story so I can understand better?" Mr. 2 breathed a sigh of relief, feeling her words as a great comfort. He bowed his head and explained. "This morning I went to the market early. My bike slipped and hit your car. I didn't mean it. I really didn't mean it. If you need to fix your bike, I will try to collect money to compensate. I know this is my fault." The woman listened attentively, nodding occasionally, but not interrupting Mr. 2. After listening, she smiled lightly. "You don't need to worry like that. I see that you are very honest and responsible. This car is only slightly scratched. There is no need to make a big deal out of it." However, the young driver still seemed annoyed and spoke. "But sister, anyway, it's his fault. If we let it go so easily like this, what will others think? What if later someone damages the car and says sorry, and that's it?" Mrs. Unghiem's face was stern. "That's enough. It's a mistake. But you are not allowed to use that attitude to talk to the old lady. Do you know how old the old lady is? Do you know how to respect the old man? Dak though? What is it?" Her sharp words made the driver silent. "B." The crowd around whispered. Their eyes changed from sympathy for Mr. 2 to admiration for the woman. One person in the crowd spoke up. "She was so right these days. It's rare to see anyone still able to maintain such respect for the elderly." Mr. 2 heard that his heart felt both comforted and guilty for causing trouble. He hesitated to add, "Really, thank you for understanding. But anyway, it's my fault. Just tell me how much it costs to fix the car." I will try. Before he finished his sentence, the woman gently raised her hand to signal to stop. "No need, sir. I don't need money to fix the car. But do you have children and grandchildren? Can you call your children and grandchildren here so we can discuss further solutions?" Mr. 2 nodded, pulling out an old phone from his pocket, tremblingly dialing the number. His voice was soft. "Huang, Dad here. I come right away to the main road near the market. Dad has a problem. I need your help on the other end of the line." A young man's voice full of worry. "What's the matter?" Dad, are you okay? I'll come right away." When he hung up the phone, the woman smiled and said in a calm voice, "We'll wait for your son to come and then continue. Don't worry. There's a way to solve everything." Mr. Tu nodded slightly. His heart gradually felt more secure, but he didn't know that his son's appearance would bring an unexpected turn to this story. Less than 20 minutes later, Mr. Tu called a motorbike. The driver was Mr. Huang, Mr. Tu's only son. Mr. Huang quickly stopped the motorbike. He took off his helmet and ran towards the crowd, standing around the luxury car. Cha-Cha is okay. Are you injured anywhere? No, he asked while hurriedly checking Mr. Tu's whole body. His face showed obvious worry. Mr. Tu shook his head in a sad voice. Dad is okay. I just accidentally scratched someone else's car. Dad apologized, but the driver said he had to pay for the car. Dad called me to come and help. Dad didn't know what to do. Hearing that, Huang turned to look at the car. The long scratch was clearly visible on the shiny paint. But what caught his attention more was the unpleasant attitude of, "The truck driver couldn't control his anger," he shouted. "The car only had a scratch. Why did he make such a big deal out of it?" "This is my father," he apologized. "Isn't that enough? Why did you scold him so badly?" The driver frowned and was about to argue, but the woman standing next to him quickly raised her hand to stop him. She calmly looked at Huang. Her eyes were sharp, but no less calm. He was the son of Mr. Huang. He nodded, his face still not showing his anger. He replied, "Yes, I am the son of Mr. Huang. This is my father's fault, but your driver has been too harsh. Are you the owner of the car? If you want to fix the car, I am willing to pay, but I do not accept their bullying. My father." The woman smiled softly. Her smile was both gentle and contained intelligence. She spoke, "Calm down. I am the owner of the car, not the driver. I absolutely did not mean to bully him." The old man apologized very sincerely, and I did not see this as too big a deal to make a fuss about. Her words were like a bucket of cold water, calming Huang's anger. He silently looked at Bao with a scrutinizing gaze, then nodded. "Head, if you say so, I thank you, but my father will still take responsibility. We will pay for the car repair for you." Mr. Tu quickly pulled his son's hand, worried voice. "Huang, Dad said that Dad didn't mean it. She here also didn't make it difficult for Dad. Don't be too tense." But Huang still kept a serious expression. He turned to look at the woman. His eyes were full of determination. "My dad did something wrong. I don't want Dad to be known as causing trouble and then not taking responsibility. You just quote the price to repair the car. I will take care of it." The woman smiled lightly, shook his head. He seemed to be a straightforward and responsible person. "But I repeat, this is not necessary. This scratch is not worth me fixing. More important, the attitude of everyone here is what needs to be talked about." She turned to look at the driver. His eyes became cold. "You know, clearly I don't like people who behave disrespectfully. How many times have I told you never to use an arrogant attitude towards the elderly? You disappoint me." The driver bowed his head, not daring to say anything more. The surrounding atmosphere became quiet. Suddenly, the woman turned back to look at Mr. Tu, then gently bent down to pick up the bundles. The vegetables that fell. "These things are your labor. Let me compensate you for the eggs and vegetables that were spoiled." Mr. Tu quickly waved his hand and shook his head. "No need. I already worked on your car. Now you're compensating me. That's really not right." But she was still determined. She took out a large bill from her wallet and gave it to Mr. Tu. "You just take it. This is not money for repairing the car, but I'm compensating for your efforts. Just consider it as me buying these vegetables and eggs." The crowd around made fun of her. Some people admired the woman's kindness. Others were surprised by the way she handled the situation. Huang stood there watching, feeling his heart soften. Lai An bowed his head and said to the woman, thanking her for not making things difficult for my father. I was too hot-tempered today. I hope you'll forgive me. The woman smiled and replied in a gentle but meaningful voice. It's nothing. I just hope you and the driver here learn a lesson. Never let anger overwhelm respect for others, especially the elderly. This world is already chaotic enough. A little kindness will do everything. Better than her words made both Huang and the crowd around them fall silent, to ponder when everything seemed to have ended. The woman looked at Mr. Tu once more and added that he was a good person. He taught his son a lesson about responsibility and humanity. I was very grateful for that. Those words were like a ray of light that warmed Mr. Tu's heart. But he didn't know that that wasn't the end of the surprises in this story. After everything seemed to have calmed down, the woman turned back to look at Mr. Tu and Mr. Huang. Mrs. An's eyes looked thoughtful, as if she was considering something. Finally, she smiled gently, but meaningfully, and slowly said, "Sir, I don't want to make things difficult for C or your son, but I want to say a few things before leaving." Both Mr. Tu and Huang were surprised. They listened respectfully while the crowd around them couldn't bear to leave. The woman continued. Her voice was both soft and full of emotion. Actually, I understand very well her situation, because my family used to be poor. I grew up in a village. I also saw my mother selling vegetables in the market to raise us. Every time she got into trouble, I wondered why people treated workers so coldly. When I grew up, I promised myself that I would never forget those days and never let other people's self-esteem be hurt just because of material things. Her words made not only Mr. Tu, but the whole crowd silent. Some people started whispering to each other. Their eyes looked at the woman with admiration. This car may be very expensive, but it is not as important as human love. A scratch on the car is nothing compared to the value of respect for the elderly or sympathy for hardworking people like her. She apologized. That was enough. No need for any compensation. She looked straight into Huang's eyes and continued, "You are a good son who knows how to protect his father. But sometimes, instead of getting angry, we need to learn to talk more calmly. Your father taught you a lesson. Learn about responsibility. But I think today, you should also learn a lesson about patience and listening." Huang was silent, feeling her words penetrate deep into his mind. He bowed his head slightly and whispered, "Thank you. I will remember that." Unexpectedly, the woman turned to the driver. Her eyes were more serious, and "You are the one who works for me. But your attitude today made me very disappointed. I don't need a good driver. I need someone who knows how to respect and sympathize with others. Remember that. If you continue to behave like today, you will not work for me for much longer." The driver bowed his head. Li Ni Da. "I'm sorry, I will learn from experience." The woman nodded slightly, then turned to Mr. Tu and Huang again. She took out a business card from her bag and gave it to Huang if he needed support at work or needed any other help. "Call me. I am always willing to help people with will and kindness." Huang awkwardly took the business card, read through it, and couldn't help but be surprised when he realized she was the CEO of a large corporation in the city. She smiled slightly. "Don't be surprised. I'm just a person who has experienced hardship, so I understand the value of kindness." Finally, she bowed slightly to Mr. Tu, then got into the car before closing the door. She added, "Uncle, I hope your life will always be smooth. Stay healthy and continue to live well, like you always do." The car slowly rolled away from the scene. The crowd began to disperse, but the eyes still held admiration for the woman who had just left. Mr. Tu looked at the business card in Huang's hand, sighed in relief, and smiled. You see, there are still many good people in this world. She is truly an understanding person. Huang nodded, his eyes filled with respect. He suddenly realized that life is not only about responsibility and pressure, but also kindness and valuable lessons from people you meet by chance. When the luxury car gradually disappeared. At the end of the road, the space seemed to become quieter. Mr. Tu still stood there. His eyes followed the direction of the woman who had just left. A feeling of gratitude and relief welled up in his heart. Huang turned to Ti carefully, pick up the bunches of vegetables still on the ground, and speak in a warmer voice than at first. Dad, today I was wrong. CN was too hot-tempered and didn't think about Dad's feelings. If it weren't for her, I'm afraid things would have gone further. Mr. Tu smiled gently, his eyes full of compassion. I realized that was good. It's not always good to use a harsh tone to solve problems, especially when you don't understand the other person well. Huang bowed his head and thought silently. It seemed that he not only learned a lesson from that woman, but also realized the importance of calmness and respect in all situations. The people around him had begun to disperse, but the story of Mr. Tu and the woman was still the topic of gossip. An old lady selling goods nearby looked at Mr. Tu with eyes full of affection. He was so lucky to meet a good person. I've lived here for so many years and rarely seen anyone as rich and kind as her. If there were more people like that in this society, life would be so much easier. A man, the other man continued. Yes, she not only taught her driver how to respect others, but also made witnesses like us ponder those words. Mr. Tu felt both warm and embarrassed. He nodded slightly in thanks, and then turned back to Huang. Please help me gather all the vegetables. This is over. I have to continue working. Huang nodded to help his father rearrange the items that could still be used. However, he kept thinking about the business card that the woman left that night. When the father and son sat at the old wooden table in the small house, Huang took out the business card and looked at the woman's name again. Nguyen Thanh Ha, CEO of An Duong Group. Huang pondered and then turned to Mr. Tu. Her father said, "If you need anything, just contact me." Do you think you should try? Mr. Tu was surprised and nodded. Why not? But you have to remember that no one can help you forever. If she gives you a chance, you have to work with your own ability and kindness. The next morning, Huang decided to call the phone number on the business card. After a short conversation, he was invited. Went to Ms. Thanh Ha's office to discuss with sincerity and a positive attitude. Quickly received a new job in her corporation with a position suitable for his abilities. Time passed. Mr. Tu's life was still as simple as before, but his smile was brighter. Huang grew up not only in his work, but also in his way of dealing with others. He learned to be patient, listen, and respect the small but precious values in life. Every time he met his father, Huang recounted the new lessons he learned from work and kind colleagues. He also often mentioned Ms. Thanh Ha, who not only changed his life, but also helped him realize the value of empathy and compassion. The story of the noble woman, the old vegetable seller, and the driver, that year gradually became an anecdote told in the market that everyone mentioned as a lesson about humanity, civilized behavior, and kindness. One peaceful morning, Mr. Tu was sitting on the porch, sipping a cup of hot tea. He suddenly smiled when he saw a car. Slightly stopped in front of the alley, the person getting out of the car was none other than Mrs. Thanh Ha. Greeting my grandfather, I stopped by to visit him for a bit. Mr. Tu invited her into the house. The joy was evident on his face. They sat and talked about life, about simple but beautiful things before leaving. Mrs. Than Ha left a saying that Mr. Tu remembered forever. He knew that kindness is like a seed. If we sow it in the right place, it will sprout and spread. And that day, he was the one who sowed that seed in my heart and everyone around. Mr. Tu sat quietly, watching Mrs. Than Ha's figure disappear. Gradually, in his heart, he felt strangely warm. Perhaps no matter how difficult life is, as long as we maintain kindness and compassion, everything will be better. The story is not just a small incident, but a testament that in a Soviet society, kindness and respect are always unchanging values. And if everyone knows how to sow the seeds of kindness, this world will become more beautiful every day.